All right, I'll start over again. Welcome everyone. This is our November Columbus user group, Sitecore user group meetup. Today we have speaker Venu Vustipalli. He is going to talk about content hub development, making people successful in changing world. Venu is a solution architect at PK. He's working in the industry for 15 years or so, and with Sitecore technology, roughly 7 years. He lives in Dallas, Texas, and we very much appreciate for him to take time today and talk about Content Hub. Floor is yours, Venu.
Definitely, my pleasure. And all right, let's get started and learn about one of the biggest Lego block in our composable DXP these days, which is Content Hub, in my opinion. So hello everyone, thanks for being here and attending my session today. And I'm going to present today to share knowledge on what it takes to become a Content Hub developer and get us ready when we are thrown into this headless composable DXP world and not just isolated to just the XPSM platform. So with that, I am Venu Vustipalli, based out of Texas, USA. Like Himadri mentioned, a solution architect, PK, Sitecore Platinum partner, specialized in XP and Content Hub. A little bit about my background. With over 15 years of my experience in many web content management systems. In my journey, I was introduced to Sitecore roughly around 7 years ago, I think. And since then, I found my passion in coming up with solutions to problems, and most importantly, I really enjoy in helping both technical and non-technical sides of the business understand the processes and the path to the next gen digital experiences. So with that, let's take a look at our today's agenda. I promise I'm not going to go over a lot of theory, trying to get to the demo as quickly as possible. Like I mentioned, firstly, a quick overview of Content Hub, just to refresh our understanding on what it exactly is. And then we take a look at personas or roles that use the system on a daily basis, and then the components that we need to be aware of in the system that leads to the tools that are available in systems so that we can customize our instance, then followed by demos. I'll try to demo most of those tools, if not all of them, because obviously the time is not enough and I haven't used a couple of them yet, to be honest. And I'll demo some use cases so that you can use as a starting point to solution your business requirements in your projects. Then we will have a quick Q&A session to finish it off. And I'll promise I'll do my best to maintain simplicity so that you can understand well enough. So here's the famous picture that we've seen it in so many presentations already. If you haven't seen it, what is Content Hub? And the name itself, obviously it's self-explanatory. It's a hub of all content that is aggregated from different sources systems. For example, like you see on the left side of this picture, most of the organizations have most of the source systems in their enterprise ecosystem, like legacy platforms, file servers, mobile device management, and supplier, etc., etc. And the Content Hub stores all this content in one place so that can be consumed by various systems in today's omni-channel world, like CMS or an e-commerce or a social channel, point of sales, etc., which you can see on the right side of this picture. And these systems are nothing but, can be used for publishing content or can be used for internal analysis perspective. So the main goal of Content Hub is to solve content crisis. The most common challenges that usually marketers these days, run into are managing content in multiple channels, such as websites, social media pages, blogs, and on various devices, and also a challenge to IT team as well to architect and build systems and tools that can manage this content, that resides in different places. That's one challenge, and there's another challenge: the time and quality to deliver content. That hugely depends on the way it's being produced and maintained in different systems. So, for example, marketing team, works with third-party agencies to get some graphical content to publish on some channel, and then bring that type of content into some system, which may require a process that could be an approval workflow or quality check and whatnot. So all these processes really take time, and eventually, of course, to deliver this content to the front end application, it takes time too. So so that's one challenge. And not just that, and then one of the main business goal in these modern digital world is making sure the content that exists in all systems is personalized, right? To start with personalization, of course, the future is going to the AI, but at least the personalization is a minimum requirement to most of the channels right now. So that's another challenge. So Content Hub provides a way to solve this content crisis by providing ability to manage, collaborate, and publish content in one place, and makes everyone's life easier by doing that. You might have heard many acronyms. Of course, most of us heard this DAM, CMP, MRM, PCM, WP, because Content Hub is not just DAM. DAM is, of course, digital asset management. It's not just DAM, it also has CMP, content marketing platform, which allows marketing team to effectively plan and manage and collaborate, the content strategies, as well as streamlining the product tasks. So that's one. And MRM is marketing resource management, a platform that meets all the marketing resource management needs, which helps organization to organize the campaigns or content production and blah blah blah. So PCM, product content management, centralizes all the product data that feeds e-commerce websites and print catalogs and whatnot. And WP, web to print, a platform that simplifies and automates the graphical content. So these are the products that Content Hub comprises, and that's Content Hub in a nutshell. And if I quickly go to the personas and roles that use the system, typically the first role is user, and these are marketing users, who can manage, publish content, and collaborate with their team, and they can create, upload assets, review and submit assets by using a workflow, and they can annotate and comment and collaborate with their team, and they can also search, and they can do blah blah blah. So they can use the system in various manners. And the secondly, we have admin role, little more advanced user who can manage data models and pages and theming and security of the system, like creating the users and user groups, or creating reports, report pages where we can display some asset statistics, with some different criteria, like what type of assets that are existing in our Content Hub system, and then who's using it and blah blah blah. So they can do all the advanced stuff. And the third one is the developer role, who can really customize various components of the system, such as data components, structure components, extension, and cloud components. These are the four main components in the Content Hub instance where we can customize. And we will take a deeper look at what these, each component in a moment, but I'm not going to go over the user and admin activities like I mentioned here, because the presentation is mainly focuses on dev activities. So usually a developer role pretty much knows full functionality of the system, and some of the responsibilities overlap with admin role, especially when defining data models during requirements gathering phase, creating taxonomy, schema definitions, and DRM contracts, etc., based on the business requirements at each client. So these are the three roles in Content Hub systems. A typical learning path would be obviously from user to admin to dev. Obviously, even developers have to go back to user and refer to any features that users use it to customize them if needed. But usually, yeah, it goes from the flow from user to admin to dev. So basically, we go and do some basic training, fundamental trainings, on learning.sitecore.com, and then we do DAM, professional mock DAM implementation training, and then followed by enterprise training. We usually have an assessment conducted right after the professional mock DAM implementation, which is open book, and then when we do the enterprise training, it's closed book. And recently we have individual Content Hub developer certification that's available for individuals to take and get certified. So that's the learning part. And now let's jump straight into what are those components that a Content Hub developer that needs to be aware of. The terminology components in here, meaning that's not like a section of a page that normally a Sitecore XP developer usually build. It means that a specific area of a Content Hub, right? And these components act as main building blocks to run a Content Hub instance. So a Content Hub that pretty much works on 4 types of components: data components, structure components, extension components, and cloud components. While it's important for a Content Hub developer to understand the functionality of these components, they should also be able to customize each one of them that matches with their business requirements. So the requirements are usually gathered in the design phase, where you basically sit with clients, business and marketing teams, you meaning generally a Sitecore partner and Content Hub specialized team, along with Sitecore Content Hub team. So Sitecore team are involved to support partners by providing frameworks and processes for a successful Content Hub implementation initially. And they also train appropriate clients marketing team resources, who will be managing the Content Hub system in future as a user and admin eventually. So now let's dig a little deeper to understand one of these, each one of these components where dev can customize the existing functionalities. So the first one, data components. It consists of main data in Content Hub, example, photos, videos, documents, along with their associated properties and relationships, which brings up a very important component into the topic here, which is entity. An entity in the world of Content Hub is a set of data that belongs together as one piece, right? For example, product or a project or a recipe or a file, etc. A typical rule is anything that can be found and displayed as a result when searching for content is a candidate for an entity. So Sitecore Content Hub is designed to allow creation of one's own entities, relevant to the way user conducts their marketing operations, right? So if you're familiar with the database entity relationship models and diagrams, these entities are very similar. So in Content Hub, we have a system with most of these entities are defined and entity relationships and are defined. You would end up either tweaking them or create your own entities and entity relations, aligned with your client's business. So generally in the design phase, while defining data model, we use some templates provided by Sitecore Content Hub team and fill in the information in the documents in those templates to help with customizing or extending our specific Content Hub instance based on those documents and requirements that we gather in the design phase. So data model is a topic here, which gives us information to decide on what out-of-the-box properties and relationships work for the entities that being migrated and what customizations we need to do based on source systems data. So each source system has different properties, different relationships that we need to bring in and make sure they're available for all the assets and content in our Content Hub instance. So we we define these data models in the business requirement phases, and then define the properties and relationships. So property, obviously, what is property? An entity, it's made up of properties that describe the entity details, example, product number, or a file size, things of that nature. And relations between entities, it gives meaning to the marketing domain model. By creating relations between entities, we can make entities more defined and richer, without duplicating data. So relations helps, not to duplicate data in kind of instance. Example, a product can have multiple variants, right? And then each of them can have a pack shot, right? ASP can use or multiple products, right? A campaign can contain a story and some associated files with it. So these are all, the examples for relationships. So that's about the Content Hub data component. And next up is structure components. And these components are kind of glue to connect and form relationships among data, which is nothing but entities we just discussed. So it acts as a glue, and like you see entity definitions, right? For all entities, we will have some definitions, and it's kind of a structure that defines the data schema to create specific type of entities. And taxonomies, portal pages, and option lists. Taxonomies and option lists are kind of similar, but taxonomies is more advanced and has more hierarchical values in the tree structure. But option lists are like kind of flat items that we create. Portal pages, like it says, of course, we can build and customize all the portal pages in kind of instance, and then add the components with the components that are available in the instance, or we can bring in the external libraries into our components, which we're going to take a look at in demo later. That's about the structured components. And if we move on to the next one, which is extension components, and most of these comprises the internal and external points where we can extend our components and then customize them. Most of these are covered in the demo later, like the external page components here. The page components are nothing but we can add the page components and then integrate external libraries within the Sitecore Content Hub pages. Triggers, actions, they work together, and we create scripts for these two work together, which we're going to take a look at it. And REST API is REST API. It's a hypermedia API built on top of HTTP, where all objects are modeled as resources. It supports all the verbs and all the actions. And Web SDK client is it's an external tool that makes it easy for developers to implement their own implementation. If you're familiar with the .NET and C#, which is predominantly most of our Sitecore resources are. So these are external components, and these will be demoed soon. And if we move to the last one, cloud components. These are Azure cloud services and managed in Azure platform. And if you have it data in external cloud or on-prem systems, you can use these tools to set up automated and scheduled workflows to migrate or refresh data in Content Hub instance based on some triggers or actions that we build. So that's pretty much about all the components that we need to be aware of, and that brings us up to the tools we have available. And these tools are divided into a couple of different categories, which is internal integration tools and then external integration tools. And internal has scripts, actions, triggers, and external components, which we discussed in the extension components earlier. And the external tools consist of a web client SDK and REST API. Web client SDK obviously is an external tool. We can run in our favorite IDE with IntelliSense, and then it provides more flexibility for .NET developers. REST API, if you have resources, if your company don't have resources, .NET resources, then obviously you can use it as the API, and then try to do the entity operations in our Content Hub instance. And some of the other tools are like CLI, and CLI it's a command line interface used for communicating with Sitecore kind of instance and run, through REST API and using C# Web SDK and run some commands. We can create our own plugins and commands as well if needed. I haven't used this tool much, but I think it will be useful in the DevOps process where we can sync Content Hub, instance in different environments, and similar to the Sitecore CLI, which is used for serialization and publishing and indexing and packaging resources and things of that nature. So similarly, in using CLI in Content Hub, we can package up, we can use it for the operations in the Content Hub in content itself. Other tool is import and export, which is important export package feature that allows us to migrate structural changes between the instances. The package itself is a zip file containing a collection of JSON files using such as taxonomies and triggers, portal pages, and entity and definitions, and etc. etc. So there are a couple more other tools which I didn't mention here, which are Fluent SDK and JavaScript SDK. Fluent SDK client it's a wrapper that builds on top of the existing SDKs, and I think it's released in the newer 4.1 version. Which and then the JavaScript SDK it's adding. You can just literally add the new npm packages for the JavaScript resources. They can similar to the web client SDK. They can do all the entity operations in your favorite client and IDE and all. So these are all tools that are available to get us going to build and customize our instance. That brings us to the demo. I'm going to quickly demo some of the components that are explained in previous slides. If I can bring up my Content Hub instance, this is my Content Hub instance. Pretty much has some customizations done for my demo, but like you see, all the top navigation, product menu. This is for PCM module, content for CMP and asset collections, and create preview. These are for DAM module and project. Drop down. These features are for MRM, right? And then obviously there are some admin places where an admin can go and customize it, or developer can go and customize things. Like we saw earlier, couple of things we discussed. Actions can be added under this actions, and triggers and scripts which will be demoed in a bit. But originally the main schema that I was explaining earlier are added under schema. Tile here, and mostly when we do the design phase and come up with our new structure, a new schema, this is where we customize and define the taxonomy. Once we define the taxonomy, we add the relationships to the taxonomy over here, pretty much. And then like I said, the taxonomies, there is taxonomy tile where we can define the taxonomies, and an option list is a flat list of items. So it can be also do this. If it's hard to find those options, you can search for it easily and then go ahead and add those items, like I show here. So this is the main managing area of the Content Hub. If I go back to the assets, I have some sample assets that are uploaded into my instance just for the demo purposes. And if I quickly go to one of the assets here, this is the asset details page, where we have different sections that comes out of the box, and we can obviously customize it once we add the new taxonomies and new properties, and in our schema definitions they will be shown here. For example, market description and other asset sources and content security. These are some custom properties and taxonomies I added in my instance, just for the demo for sake. And I will show you how we can customize it later. So this is the asset details page, and then obviously we can go and edit these asset details pages under pages section. So if I go to pages, pretty much any pages we can customize it. And under here there is asset details page, and like you see the different components that are available, and my other custom details, they're all here. So I'm going to go over and do demo on external components in a little bit, but in the meantime, these are all the data, and they are an extension, other components that we quickly discussed earlier. So first off, I'm going to show REST API. So we can use our favorite API client to access these endpoints. And the REST API endpoint is, like I said, hypermedia API built on top of HTTP, and all data is sent and received as JSON. And most of the standard HTTP verbs are supported, like get, put, post, delete, and whatnot in REST API. It uses the standard HTTP headers, right? And a couple of important ones here are content type is always supposed to be application JSON, and we can use the XAuth token to authenticate to our Content Hub instance. So if I bring up my favorite client, API client here, which is Postman, and I have a couple of endpoints that for example we can use, right? API status is the only endpoint which doesn't require any authentication. Like you see, that which gives us information about our instance, what's running, what version of it, and what jobs are running. And there is also an authenticate API endpoint then we can use to get any tokens to connect to our instance. Like if we want to access the jobs that exist in our Content Hub instance, we can run this and receive. Okay, right now I only have one job, but usually you will have plenty more. This is just a job that job is nothing but when we initiate any trigger of change or saving things and blah blah blah, Content Hub creates a job. And in this case, I was mass editing a couple of assets, changing some description, and then it gave us that one job was running behind the scenes, and that's one endpoint. And this is an important endpoint API entities. We can also, like you saw the asset details page earlier, we can also look at the entities, properties, and relationships, relations in this JSON structure as well. This is the endpoint that we use it either in REST API or in Web Client SDK. And another endpoint, entity definitions, if you want to read about the entities and entity definition related information, we can run this endpoint. If I quickly go back to my Content Hub instance, the asset details that I was showing here, we can, like I said, either in REST API, you can get the response of the JSON by sending a request, or even if you go and access it through the browser, you can get the information about the properties and relations, for that. This is the most important page for developers, so that you would know where the properties and what are the names and the schema, of the schema defined and taxonomies defined behind the scenes, so that when you want to do any entity operations, either using different tools, it will give you a good, good information. So if I quickly go back to my Postman, we can there's another entities endpoint. Obviously, like I showed, we can do CRUD operations and change any namings and file names as well. And there's another endpoint called query. We can use query to query and return and just any entities based on any criteria. Like in this example, we have asset definition and created by ID, and this is usually just my username, and then I created whatever the assets that are created by me. That's the query it's returning. So we can use this endpoint. obviously we use the query. There are two endpoints, query and search endpoint as well. So we use query endpoints if we have a limited and a fewer number of results that we are expecting, and we use search API obviously, for broader and more if we expect more results. So if I look at some other examples, search API, like I say, I'm just searching for orange in any of the entities names or titles or anywhere, you can find it. And we can also build a query using this search endpoint, and you can filter and find the stuff that are, in this case, the value is fruit. And we can also do, using the query endpoint, we can also, search for the facet search and then query through and then get the items. And the last one, this is a little more advanced, and I will come back to this once I, do the demo on scripts and triggers and actions. I will come back to this one. So that's about the REST API tool. And like I said, we would, if we were using C# and JavaScript, of course, we end up using the Client SDK and do the entity operations. But if for some reason, if we don't have resources that work with the .NET, and then obviously we can use the REST API and then implement our solution, depending upon however the requirements. So some of the best practices, we need to establish a retry after logic, which is not coming out of the box when we're using this REST API. And then we can group our request in batches, and take action when we run into too many request response, type, and create dedicated API users for each integration to detect, or troubleshoot the issues when we having errors and on different platforms. So that's REST API. And if I go to the next one, external components. So external page components allow you to integrate external libraries within Sitecore kind of portal pages. So we can, like I said, there are a bunch of out-of-the-box components that we can use. And then if we want to customize and then add our external libraries into any of the components, the component we use is external component. So if I go to my instance quickly and go to, that's the details page that I was showing. So in here, I added a couple of external components, and then as you can see, they're hidden. But the way I do add is, okay, you go to this section. All right, I want to add a component, external component that shows some information over here. And as a details page, you just go to that page and then add a new component. Like you see there, a bunch of out-of-the-box components available, and you search for external, and then you can add the external component. So once you add the component, obviously have the properties that we can see here. If I go to, for example, I'm adding the external component, which uses some of the resources, an external library. We can add the external URL, external, handlebar JavaScript library in here, and then we add our code. This is the basic code. We can add all the JavaScript, and then Ajax calls you can add here. And this is a pretty sample code that's using subscribing to the events, which is entity loaded event and then saved event, and then basically injecting the title, changing the title and description once we save anything on that component. So you can see the title description are being updated when the entity is saved and event is triggered. And template is nothing but our markup we can add, and messages, we don't have anything here, but this is a place people we can use to add any translation messages. So if we quickly turn on this component, which we can do it from here, settings, and make it visible, and then go back to my asset details page. We can see the title and description is being displayed here. So this is pretty basic use case. Like if you want to display any any useful information for marketing users, we can display it. I mean, it doesn't need to be title description, but it can be anything else. So if something is changed or some events are happening, it can literally display all that relevant information as a pretty basic use case here. So that's how we add external component and add our external libraries to display something, right? Using that. And then if we go to a little more advanced use case, let me turn this off. And there's another external component I have here, which says similar asset. So what it does is, okay, we're not adding any external libraries in this case. We just added all the code from in our component itself, which has JavaScript and Ajax calls here. So this code is pretty much using the REST API. So we can combine these two different types of tools here, right? So we have query endpoint in REST API. It's using the REST API and doing some full text query, like it's finding all the assets that are related, with some name, and then add those names as related assets to our asset details page, this component, literally. So we have the REST API and using, and then it's a subscription to the, based on the events, they're all same, but it's just adding the related links to the component. So if I quickly turn on this component, which we can add here, visible, then quickly go back and refresh. Like you can see, so all these related links are being displayed now on our asset details page, and these are nothing but the received items or entities from the REST API query endpoint that we were using, and then we can write query however we want, and then based on our requirements. So this is a little more advanced, and we can have previous, next, and then it shows all the related links to it, and this is how we can add some information for marketing users if they want to have some associated assets and things of that nature. So that's external component, and that's how we use it. And the next one is Web Client SDK. Obviously, this is our most important tool, external tool that most of the developers use, because this is .NET and based in C#, and people can do any entity operations by using this tool. And we have new SDK since version 3, so that the code could be used in both Web SDK and scripting SDK. So we'll talk about the internal scripting in a minute, which can be used for triggers and actions. But this is the external SDK that we can use by adding to our local project itself. So if I bring up my local .NET Core app, and so literally this is the kind of .NET Core console app I created and added. You get packages called Scilabs SDK Web Client SDK, and then once we have that, we have a couple of utility classes to create the instance and then connect to our Content Hub instance, and then have a pretty basic program that does the basic CRUD operation. So before I show the program, this is my client class, which is creating either client, M client instance, and then creating client which connects to my Content Hub instance by using different OAuth, grants. Here I'm using the password grant. There is also a refresh token grant you can use if you want in the code, which uses some app settings which are coming from the other helper class here. These are all in my environment variables, host and client. So before we have this, we just go ahead and create an OAuth client in Content Hub instance, and once we have that, we use this connection settings to connect to the instance, and then once we connect it, we can perform any entity operations in the Content Hub instance. So in this example, I'm doing, for demo perspective, I'm just doing some basic CRUD read operation. Like here, first it's checking for the connection successful. Once it's connected, I'm getting all the backdrop assets that are available in my content hub instance. Let's say if I want to do something with it, but right now I'm only doing the read operation. But in this case, I'm getting all the backdrop assets by using here. Obviously, to get the similar stuff in the REST API, what we would have been done is using the query endpoint and then using the asset definition and obviously what is the asset type ID for that backdrop assets. Backdrop assets ID is 30491, and then final lifecycle status to asset is final lifecycle status is another important property in kind of instance, which actually tells us what status an entity is in, like whether it's approved or under review or created status. And in this case, I'm using 544, which is the approved status. So these are we doing in REST API, but using our web client SDK, we can use a similar write a link query that actually does the same thing and return those items by returning what we want to return, like what properties and relationships that we want to display here. In this case, I'm loading configuration full, which includes all the properties and as well as relationships. We only load the appropriate ones because of the performance issues. We don't want to keep loading all the relationships unnecessarily to overload the system. So depending upon what operations we're doing, we just load either full or just relations or properties. So in this case, I'm loading full because I wanted to show two different examples for how you directly access the properties, which is the title in this case, and then the second one is the relationship is the content security is the relation that I want to access and display in this case. So once I have the values, obviously properties and relation, I'm displaying them into the console here, which is just nothing but a basic CRUD read operation. So if I quickly run this app, first it checks for the content successful, and it's finding how many backdrop assets there are, 16 in my case, and then just reading and displaying the information that we have. Okay, we have this type asset title this, and then the content security is set to restricted, for this topic, for this asset. So pretty basic CRUD operation that we can do, but this is how you create your project and different helper classes to do any kind of migration activity, or if you want to play with change any taxonomies, anything programmatically, this is the starting point. So that's Web Client SDK tool, and obviously some of the best practices we should be using Web SDK, which has embedded throttling, over the REST API, like I was showing earlier. In the REST API, we didn't have out-of-the-box throttling, and obviously, depending upon the resource in the business, in our IT team, we can choose which tool that needs to be used. But most of Sitecore developers are predominantly .NET developers. We use this external Web Client SDK tool more, and another best case would be use Web SDK for migration activities, because, like I said, we are Sitecore .NET developers, and when working with Azure functions, obviously it's a good practice to reuse the same helper client class that I created, so that we can use the same helper class, and then for all the different either Azure functions or our internal content hub instance. So those are the that's about the Web Client SDK. And if I move on to the scripts, triggers, and actions, quickly go back to my instance, go back to manage, and scripts, triggers, and actions. The names itself actually have tiles here. We have scripts, and then we have actions, and then we have triggers. Before we have anything, obviously we need to have a script ready. And for the demo perspective, I just have a I have a couple of them, but I'll show one basic one first. So we create a script here. And when we create a script, obviously we can select different types of scripts that are available. Action is the most obviously popular one. People use action script to perform any entity operations or based on the triggers and actions in the system itself. And then metadata processing. Let's say if you're uploading some assets from Canon images or something, if you want to process metadata and add more metadata, then we can use these. And then pre-registration, post-registration, sign in, they're all during the login and registration flow. If you want to have some some instance customization that needs to be happening while the user is logging in or registering, then we can use those type of it. But in this case, this is my example script is action script, and which is a basic sample script to start with that we can use. Just to what it does is just it takes the title value and then updates the marketing description value based on that's what defined by our triggers. So this is a place where we can add the scripts internally in Content Hub instance, and all the libraries here they're restricted, and then we cannot just add anything that we want. We cannot add anything that we could, and obviously there's documentation around like what is allowed and what is not allowed in our documentation. So if I quickly go to just a basic sample script, but if I quickly go to triggers, maybe I should go to actions first because we need an action first. So action in this case is same thing. I named it similarly. So if I quickly go to this action, there are different types of actions that we can use. So mostly, like I said, popular one is action script that we can use it for internal activities, but we can use other types of actions if you are working with either Azure service buses in the cloud, and if you want to perform any automated operations in Content Hub instance, we can use those like API call as well. You can use to connect to the external systems and then make or trigger some actions and scripts in our instance itself. Like if you want to sync the data between our front end and back end, front end and Content Hub instance, we can use different types of one. But here we have action script selected because our script is action. So we have selected that and then selected the script that was created, which is sync marketing description if a title is changed. So if a title is changed is the condition that we have. Where is that defined? So that's defined in triggers. So if I quickly go to trigger section. So now we have script and an action. And trigger is nothing but it has objective and condition. Like what's the condition it should run on? This is enabled. I quickly go to the trigger. Like you see the objective of this trigger is entity modification. We can select different types of objectives, either while creating an entity or objective, or entity modification objective or entity deletion. And this is another important setting that we have here in background. And there is also another one in process. In background runs after once the trigger is made and all, but in process it's quite performance consuming. So you only use in process when it's absolutely necessary to change the UI when some things are being changed, but background is most preferred one. And conditions in this case, like I said, where was the condition was triggered? This is where we set the condition for the entity definition asset, and the title has changed. As soon as the title has changed, we have all the objective, all the entities are modified. Trigger the action, which is under the action tab here. Sync marketing description is our action that was created, which are shown over here. So now they're all tied together, right? Just for a simple demo perspective here. we just, as soon as we change, the title and save, then it should change the marketing description in this case. So for example, if I change the background, logo background asset or something, and then save. So if this is ran by the script, then it wouldn't actually show it immediately because this is not from the UI external component that I showed you earlier, but this is running through the internal script itself. So if we refresh the page, as you can see, the title is synced with the marketing description. So this is just a pretty basic use case I came up with, so that it opens up the door so you can do pretty much anything in Content Hub if you want to change and based on some actions and events that happening. So that's a basic example. And if I quickly go to the Postman, the more advanced one I was telling earlier, so we can create scripts inside our Content Hub instance, and we can trigger them using our REST API as well. So there is script endpoint that we can use, and we are triggering the script that I'm showing here. I'm executing, and what it does is, if I quickly go back to the scripts area, this is mass edit script, and that's the if I quickly this is the mass edit script, and which is executed by using the REST API payload, which has a job ID as a to trigger that. So if I quickly go to the mass edit script inside, what it's doing is it has a job ID, which is the mass edit job ID, and it's going to all the assets that are edited in the mass edit job, and then updating those assets and preventing the final life cycle status in this case, which is final life cycle is approved, right, for the job that I have here, and it basically add that final life cycle status to those assets, property name, which is the marketing description, which is nothing but this is the marketing description field I have. I wanted to add or prepend a final life cycle status to this, and then it just adds it right here. So if I quickly go to my REST API, and if I trigger and execute this find, and this is the job ID which I had it earlier in my jobs, which is nothing but a mass edit job. And then when I run this client, it shows all the log information that I have in my script, which goes to all the asset IDs that are mass edited. And then basically, originally the marketing description was this, right? I do something, and then it's adding the final cycle status, and this is the response that we're receiving. So you can combine all these tools and use them however you want, based on the business requirements, and then ease of use to do any kind of operations. So they should give us, like, how do you create it, not only by creating triggers and actions, you can run the internal scripts, you can also trigger those internal scripts that are created through via REST API. So that should cover the advanced stuff too. So if I quickly go back to my scripts and triggers and actions best practices, like I was saying, using in background scripts by default, obviously, and execute in process only when necessary, when immediate feedback is required from UI, and because it's time consuming. And use custom email template and send notifications. We can, for example, if someone rejects an asset workflow, then we will send the notifications, and we can use the custom email template, and we can create those kind of templates in our internal scripts interface itself, and execute metadata scripts to upload the additional metadata. Like I was saying, if you have any XMP metadata or additional metadata, we can use and create the metadata processing scripts and to execute that. And use your favorite IDE in Web Client SDK to develop scripts and build on Content Hub interface if it needs to be triggered by an action. So obviously, the problem with creating the script in our internal kind of instance is like you don't have IntelliSense and you don't know what's going on, right? So even though you have logging and debugging a little bit, but it still will be beneficial to just build that favorite IE in local through Web Client SDK, and then once that's done, if you want to use it by triggers and actions, then you can copy paste over there and then use it in that perspective. So that's the last tool, and some reference materials. Obviously, the catalog, you can go on and register for those training courses, and documentation for 4.0 instance in this case here, and Sitecore Guild. Obviously, Chris is here as well. So they started this long time back, and then we have some starter kits, and then you can use the different classes in your implementation, and some blog posts are on there. I started blogging since beginning of this year on the Content Hub and how you proceed, and even some of the training around the admin and user activities as well. If you want to be familiar with, you can use all this. And the Content Hub documentation pretty much has some examples and API documentations for Web Client SDK and JavaScript SDK, and that's all available that you can use as a starting point to customize your Content Hub instance. That concludes the demo, and then brings us to the Q&A session. And hopefully I covered most of the tools that can bring you up to speed on Content Hub, and then build that biggest block in our composable DXP. I'll pass it over.
All right, we have 1 more minute. So if anyone has any question, please go ahead. No?
Looks like it was simple enough.
All right.
It was nice enough.
Yeah, very nice. Actually, I have, if I can ask one thing, have you used pre-modeling for creating your content type? That was something like, I'm interested to see how pre-modeling content creation works.
For the CMP or DAM assets?
No, CMP. Actually, the reason I'm asking is actually I was working on something and I didn't want to, I had to create some content, but it's really not like a blog or something. So if you customize the content, you can create your content type, custom content type, but it actually adds base information to that. I didn't want to do that way. I wanted to create a content type, which is I want to start from the scratch and I decide what properties and things I want to add. So apparently that needs pre-modeling license.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't came across that use case yet, but most of the times, like you were saying, I went ahead and then customized the m.content, right? And then m.assets for DAM, and then m.content for CMP, and then add our taxonomies and relations, based on the properties that we need for the content in CMP, and as well as the DAM, in that case. But like you're saying, I think that is something to explore.
As long as you go with corporate edition or higher, then you can do free modeling. And one of the things that I really recommend is that we don't be selling pro version to clients unless we really know that they're not going to be wanting any custom entities. If they're doing anything with PCM, likely they're going to want custom entities, and you want them to at least be on corporate. That's one of the things I've noted, like mentoring over the past year or so, that anybody that's went with pro, they've run into a lot of issues really quickly.
Yeah, actually, that's one reason actually I wanted to see how that works, because after looking at that, I can actually decide where and when to actually recommend that free modeling or custom content creation, right? So yeah, but good point, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for jumping in, Chris.
Great talk. Thank you, Venu, for taking time and talking about Content Hub. And thanks everyone for joining today's meetup. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.